Did you know that there are a lot of BeeGees and Barry Gibb fans in the universe? There are. And so we're going to talk about the new Barry Gibb BeeGees Greenfields album that's just come out. It's the #1 album in Australia. We're going to talk about it right now. Hey everybody, Chris King here with Love Live Music. Thanks so much for tuning in to my channel today. If you've never been here before and you enjoy hearing people talk about live music, well, we don't have people, but we got me. If you want to hear me talk about live music, then click subscribe. If you want to hear me talk about music and music reviews and music news and some of my favorite artists, then click subscribe. If you want to hear me talk about running my restaurant and my live music venues and the things that I go through on a day-to-day basis, still click subscribe. If you want to hear me talk about going through the drive-thru of the fast food place just now, and I got my burger, and I got my fries, and I got my Sprite, but the Sprite had no syrup in it. It was all just carbonated water. If you want to hear me talk about stuff like that, don't click subscribe, because really, that's just my frustrations with the fast food industry in general and why I shouldn't be going there, because I need to lose my COVID weight. What I want to talk about today is this new record attributed to the Gibbs Brothers songbook. It's Barry Gibb and a host of special guests under the guise of Greenfields. This is something that Barry has put together with he and a host of, let's call them country music celebrities. Some of those cats might not want to be filed as such as country music, but just for the sake of my little YouTube channel, we'll call it country music under the general umbrella as such. These are songs that Barry is doing as a duet with different artists. Now, this is not unlike many of the duets type projects we've seen through the years. I think that maybe Sinatra did it. I mean, nobody does anything first, but Sinatra certainly had one maybe in the mid-90s, late 90s that was, I guess he died in the late 90s, maybe in the mid-90s, that was very popular. And we've seen a lot of artists. Tony Bennett has done one. I'm sure that there are a host of others that have done these types of projects. But right now, we're specifically focusing on Barry Gibb, his Greenfields, the Gibbs Brothers songbook. And in the title, he even throws in Volume 1. That, in the business, is known as a teaser, because this Volume 1 leads us to think there might be a Volume 2. Will Volume 2 be Barry and more country artists? Will it be Barry and a bunch of heavy metal artists? We don't know. We just don't know. So any guesses that you want to take are just guesses. But getting into this album, and the reason that I'm talking about this album, and the reason that I gave this album a real good listen earlier, are as such. One, this is the #1 album in some parts of the world, Australia being one of those parts. Number two, I've recently seen the BeeGees How Do You Mend a Broken Heart documentary that's on HBO Max, and I thought it was fantastic. And if you want to hear me talk about it for 20 minutes, then there's a link coming up right now. But number three is I've learned to relove some BeeGees material and to really accept them as the fact that, hey, there's not a lot of people that have had a career of 50-ish years spanning so many hit songs. I mean, you can say the Beatles have done it and the Stones have done it, and there aren't many beyond that. It's not like Elvis is making records anymore, right? He's not. He's still dead. So we've got Barry Gibb, the older brother of the BeeGees, along with Morris and Robin. And they have written so many songs, so many hits for themselves and for other people that it's pretty amazing. And that was one of my big takeaways from the How Do You Mend a Broken Heart documentary. Now, I've been told that there's another documentary that I need to pay attention to that I'm going to watch and post up my thoughts on that here in the next week or two. But right now, we're going to talk about this Greenfields record, which came out on January the 8th. Speaking of Elvis, that's Elvis's birthday. That's David Bowie's birthday. Somebody else's birthday. For some reason, I'm thinking Steve Jobs, but I don't know. Could be wrong, because mainly what I'm thinking about right now is Barry Gibb, Morris Gibb, Robin Gibb, and the songs that they've written that now have gone onto this Greenfields record, and we've got Barry in a host of duet situations. What's the background on this record? Well, the background is Barry had heard... I know this might seem a little far-fetched to you, because as I was reading the backstory, I was thinking, I don't know. But Barry's son brings to him a track by Chris Stapleton. Barry Gibb says, oh my gosh, who is that? Barry's son, Stephen? Is it Stephen Gibb? I don't know. Barry's son says, that is Chris Stapleton. Barry Gibb says, hey, I didn't know people were still making music like that. What with real organic instruments and no overdubs and no studio trickery. Get me in touch with Dave Cobb, the producer. Well, I got to say to Barry Gibb, Barry, what have you been listening to for a while? Because we can all harp on rock and roll is dead or music is this or that. But at the end of the day, people are still making records like this and really have never stopped. Might not be super popular as Chris Stapleton is here at this point in the 2020s, but people have still been making records organically. Ultimately, Barry makes this record in Nashville. I think he flies to Nashville. Supposedly, he recorded it in studio with almost all of these artists. I think there's a track with Brandy Carlisle and maybe one with Miranda Lambert where Barry wasn't actually in the studio when it was recorded, but supposedly at the rest of the songs, they were recorded with him live singing with the other artist. And man, I gotta say, we got a lot of great artists on here. And we kick it off with Keith Urban. Next, he performs what was the lead-off single, Words of a Fool, with Jason Isbell. This one, and I love Jason, and I love Jason's band, but this, I listened to it once and I passed it over. It didn't floor me. The third track, Run to Me, with Brandy Carlisle. And I believe that this was actually originally written for a Barry Gibb solo album in the mid-'80s. A solo album which didn't necessarily ever see, I don't think this track has ever seen a release. And this is a very good track for fans of the way that the BeeGees songs sound. And they do have a sound outside of what the BeeGees vocal sound is. Their songwriting has always had a particular style to it, which becomes evident as you get deeper into this recording of Greenfields. That as we get towards the end, we start saying, yeah, man, I mean, I get that this is the BeeGees sound. And it's just not based on their vocals. A lot of it's based on harmonies, but just the layering of it and the way that the harmonies come into play, I guess, would be indicative of what their sound is. Standout track for me, number 4, Too Much Heaven with Alison Krauss. My goodness, how good does her voice sound? This actually might surpass the original in being a standout track written by Barry Gibb and the brothers. This is just, it sounds so good. And if you are just going to cherry pick the songs that you want to hear on this, then Too Much Heaven, Barry and Alison Krauss is really one that you want to hear. Next up, we've got Lonely Days with Little Big Town. And Little Big Town's on 2 tracks on this particular release. And I have to say that I don't love the Little Big Town vocals. It sounds a little thin to me and layered as such that, I don't know, it's like a very thin layer of a wafer cookie. Next up, we've got Dolly Parton doing the track Words, another song that I've never heard. If there's one criticism that I've got, it's something that is beyond anybody's solution. Is that one of the same problems I really had from the new Paul McCartney album? And that is Paul McCartney, and I love McCartney. It just sounds, his vocals sound a little old. They have the age, they're worn. It doesn't sound like the Paul McCartney that we heard in the 60s and 70s and 80s. And it's evident throughout this, the same thing for Barry Gibb. His vocals, he sounds like an old guy singing his songs. He's certainly got some strong parts. He's got some parts that don't sound as good. With all respect in the world to Barry Gibb, just sometimes I don't love his vocals compared to what it would sound like in the original track. But Dolly comes in on this Words track, and even though she sounds older, here we are. Today I'm recording this on her 75th birthday, but she sounds good. She sounds good. She knows her range. She knows exactly the pocket that she fits in, and makes the most of this track Words that I've never heard before, but it sounds real good. As an anecdote, I read that she told Barry Gibb when they were recording this song together that she stood while recording in Nashville, the Nashville studio, probably in one of the famed RCA studios, right? I think that's the big studio that this stuff goes down in. She told Barry Gibb that where she was standing recording this song Words with him was the exact same spot that she stood when she recorded I Will Always Love You and Jolene, which is pretty mind-blowing. And even Barry Gibb, with all the accolades in the world, probably felt a shiver, a tingle, some goosebumps when Dolly Parton told him that. I know I would, and I'm no Barry Gibb. You know, I can't say that Jive Talkin' is my favorite track on this. I enjoyed in the documentary the backstory of Jive Talkin' and how he wrote the music for it. But this version of Jive Talkin's got Miranda Lambert. It's got Jay Buchanan, who we're going to hear from later, and I've got something to say about him. But all in all, this is kind of a throwaway for me. I actually prefer a couple of the songs that I'd never heard before to this particular reading of Jive Talkin'. From there, we go to How Deep Is Your Love with Little Big Town and Tommy Emmanuel. Tommy Emmanuel, what a great, great player. What an incredible guitar player. And it's exciting to hear him on this track. Again, Little Big Town, the recording of it, their vocalization sounds very much like the other track that they're on, and just not my favorite thing in the world. It just sounds a little thin to me. Next up, you've got How Do You Mend a Broken Heart? Sheryl Crow doing a pretty good job with Barry on that one. Cheryl's vocals still strong as ever. From there, we go to Love Somebody, and this is the Jay Buchanan track that he gets top billing. Jay Buchanan was on Jive Talkin' with Miranda Lambert, and let me tell you, Jay Buchanan, Rival Sons, one of the great rock and roll bands to come out of the last 6, 7, 8 years. And you need to keep your eye on Jay Buchanan, because to see him cross over into a project like this, in my opinion, is very exciting. That being said, I think Dave Cobb produced the Rival Sons albums, so I'm assuming Dave Cobb had a lot to do with Jay Buchanan being on this project. Olivia Newton-John comes in on the 11th track with Rest Your Love on Me, another song that I'm unfamiliar with from the catalog of Gibbs Brothers music. But how exciting is it to hear my first crush ever, Olivia Newton-John, singing very well on a track. I know that she's had a number of things over the last 10 plus years to keep her from being in front of a microphone, but hey, this is a good track. She does a good job, and maybe if we're lucky, we get more ONJ music in the future, because I would really like to hear. She should do a duets album with all of her many hits. That would be fantastic, in my opinion. We wrap it up with Butterfly, featuring David Rawlings and Gillian Welch. And I believe that this is the track that gives Greenfields its name, because there's a lyric that references Greenfields in the song Butterfly. And, you know, Gillian and David cannot mess up anything in my book. They are so good and so clean and refreshing to hear them. Their very traditional Nashville sound that they've been working on for 25 years. It comes through in this track, and it's a good track. All in all, if you are a BeeGees fan and you are interested in hearing what would be considered a country-esque, Americana-esque take on several songs in their songbook, then you may really enjoy Greenfields. Volume 1. I think we're going to have more volumes. I mean, I enjoyed it, and I'll probably go back, and I saved a couple of the tracks that I'll put on some of my favorite playlists for different occasions, but I enjoyed it. I think that if you like Barry Gibb and Robin Gibb and Morris Gibb, that you're going to like it as well. And I hope that you like some of these videos that are coming up on the screen right now, because I like to talk about music and I like to do it for you. And if you enjoy it, I hope you subscribe to it. And if you subscribe to it, then I'm going to see you real soon.